Good afternoon, reporting to you live from the Franklin Pierce Center. I'm Taylor Healy.
And I'm Brendan Sicca. This is the 13th Presidency in the Press here at Franklin Pierce.
Yes, 15 students from across New Hampshire traveled to Rindge in the hopes of learning more about journalism, media, and politics.
They had the opportunity of meeting many influential figures.
People like Peter Mayer, Bruce Zenka, Joe Shaka, and many more.
Here to talk about their own personal experiences are many of our peers.
Yes. Take it away, Allison.
Thank you for speaking with me today.
Great to be with you, Allison. Thank you.
So I just wanted to ask you some questions kind of focused on the 2016 election. So starting with, looking back through your experiences and now being 6 months into the Trump presidency, was this past election more significant than others?
Well, certainly it was more surprising than others, and I have to give a disclaimer here for those that don't know. I retired in 2015. I continued doing some work for CBS News as what they called a contributor during the 2016 process, 2016 cycle, but I was not out, on the road with any of the candidates through the primaries. I certainly paid close attention, but I was as surprised as anyone else on election night with the outcome after all of the polling that we were so wedded to, especially in the closing days of the campaign.
So in terms more of the role and the impact of the media, how was this more significant?
Well, I think that Donald Trump certainly made the media part of his campaign. So many other candidates, I can't remember another candidate who made the coverage a campaign issue.
Yeah.
And certainly I can't remember any other candidate who, I might say, because I'm retired and I couldn't have said this when I was still working, so despicably painted the media as the enemy and as the opposition, and so awfully singled out especially women reporters, a disabled newspaper reporter, for ridicule. So we'd never really seen anything like it. When I covered George H.W. Bush's campaign in 1992, his re-election campaign, which of course he lost, I remember that President Bush would sort of jokingly say to audiences, "Annoy the media, re-elect Bush." And he didn't say destroy the media, which in effect is, some believe Donald Trump's language. But Bush 41 would say annoy the media. And then when some of us who were covering him were getting pummeled by campaign signs going in and out of some rallies, word got to him, and he would tell audiences, "I'm talking about those talking heads back in Washington, not these folks who are traveling with me." So in that campaign, the media, became sort of a minor issue, but never, like, in answer to your question, the way it did in the 2016 campaign, and as it is now that Trump is in office.
So, so we know that the trust of the press is now at a historic low in the eyes of the public, but while in the days like right after Watergate, the press was held in high esteem because of such good reporting. What do you think has caused the public to lose trust in the press, and again, how would we earn it back?
That is a terrific question, and it's a really difficult one to answer. I think one of the problems is that there are so many different sources of information, and so many of them, are really true phony news, that it makes for so many people a challenge, or very difficult for them to realize what is real and what is something that's really an illegitimate source of news. And we've just become so polarized in the country in general that I think that the media have really taken a hit because of that too. And they have to really work to, they really have to work to earn the public's trust. They have to, reporters at the White House cannot allow themselves to be labeled as the opposition. They can be labeled as the opposition. They can't allow themselves to become the opposition in any way. They just have to do their job, the same job that they've always been assigned to do, and that's to gather the facts about the presidency, report on the issues in context without taking sides. And Marlin Fitzwater himself, who this wonderful center is named for, believes, he told me going into this, to tell you and the other students that most reporters are doing just that now, in his esteemed opinion.
So, given all the current berating of the press, if you had gotten a chance to be on the campaign trail more than just, as you said, being a contributor, would you have wanted to?
Oh, I mean, if I were still working, would I have wanted? Yes, I covered every. And I'm not bragging here, just the facts. I covered every primary campaign, every election, every inauguration, and every set of Republican and Democratic conventions from 1980 until 2012. And I retired in 2015. And I still couldn't quite let go, so I wangled this contributor's job with CBS News to help them cover the debates and election night.
So, based on stories like the coverage of Trump's inauguration crowds, do you believe that Sean Spicer is being encouraged to give false information to the public?
Well, I think that Mr. Spicer, and again, I'm not in the briefing room every day, has sort of been hung out to dry a few times. I don't remember any press secretary standing out there and giving facts, giving statements, and having them be contradicted by various people from the, on the president's staff, and even in some cases the president himself. So he's in a very difficult position. He is serving a very unusual client who starts his day as his own press secretary by being what I have called the commander-in-tweet. And he, pumps out these tweets, and I, call me old-fashioned, but I don't think that that is a way for a president to communicate with this country. Every president who I covered and some before found ingenious ways to use the media of that time to go around the White House press corps, and I certainly understand it, and I didn't begrudge them that. I even participated in one case when I was a local reporter in Atlanta, and Gerald R. Ford, the president, came to Atlanta, Georgia, and held a regional news conference. He would only take questions from local reporters. The White House press, which I, of course, was not a part of then, was sitting in another room, and it was a way to open it up to questions from someone else and a way to go around the White House press corps. Barack Obama did it very ingeniously, becoming the first social media president, where he would meet with people your age or maybe a little bit older in some cases from various social media, and they would do YouTube interviews. So every president has tried to do it, and Donald Trump is doing it on Twitter. Maybe it's his message that I have the biggest problem with, and not the vehicle, which is Twitter.
So, polling conducted by the Washington Post during the 2016 campaign concluded that Trump's main demographic was uneducated white males. So do you think that having such uneducated supporters made it more easier to be liked?
Well, certainly it made it easier to be liked by that voting segment, and certainly made it easier to be liked, which translated into votes, by people that he was able to sell on his presidency, but with his platform and what he had in mind. And now, as the really old saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. Right now he is being tested on whether he is going to be able to deliver on the many promises that he made to make America great again. I happen to have thought and still think that America is already great.
So, in your opinion, what was Donald Trump's appeal to the American people?
Well, I think that his appeal basically was to rebuild ailing industries. So that really helped him win those key states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, where Hillary Clinton was totally blindsided and where the pollsters were blindsided, because in retrospect, some of the polling experts will tell us that they didn't do enough polling, especially late in the game, in those states, because they'd always been traditionally, Democratic. And as I told all of you in our discussions here, I think some of the biggest mistakes I ever made or came close to making were based on assumptions, not mistakes that necessarily ended up in stories, but in my assuming that things were a certain way, and then I'd find out, hopefully in time before I went on the air, that my assumptions were wrong. And there were a lot of assumptions in this campaign that really messed people up, huh?
What do you think that people mostly disliked about Donald Trump when we look at how outspoken he is and how he uses social media to kind of display that?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on the demographic, and again, we all see things through our own life experiences and our own upbringing and so forth. So I think that's really a tough one to answer. You know, you'd have to ask individual voters. And again, I wasn't out there, and I can't have this disclaimer enough to say that I never could have made the statements that I'm making to you right now when I was working. We being my wife and I, could never have bumper stickers on our cars, campaign contributions on a checking account. I never made any campaign contributions, and we couldn't have yard signs and things like that. And my very best friends, if I had any political opinions, I did vote in every election. I never told anyone how I voted or how I felt about anyone, and even my closest friends don't know, you know, exactly how I felt on certain issues and certain candidates. But that's all changed because I'm retired.
Focusing more on the media aspect. So, in an interview you had with the U.S. News and World Report in 2011, you stated that when you first began your career, that the only tools available to you were typewriters and dial telephones, and that you would carry a roll of dimes with you for payphones. So do you think that having such easy access to media as we do today would have aided you or lessened your experiences?
Well, you know, the job is still the same. It really is. But as I told all of you, you're living through an information and media revolution right now with the things that are changing, and they're such a part of your life and all of our lives. Things were so different back then, but the job was still the same. The ultimate job to, as your journalism teacher I know has taught you, who, what, when, where, why, and how, to get that into the lead of a story is still the basic of what we have to do as journalists. And, you know, I think sometimes all of these innovations that we have with filing for websites constantly, as I keep saying, we once had 24-hour news cycles, and now they're 24-second news cycles that don't really give us enough time to be thoughtful a lot of times as much as we'd like to be in formulating our stories. But again, the basic job is still the same.
That's about all the questions that I had for you today.
And they were good ones. They were probably among the best that I've heard, not only here or anywhere else.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You did your homework.
By 2010, there was a drop by 33%, or 20 million subscribers. Gone. That's a major drop in print newspapers, and it's due to many changes in modern news. Even in my area back home, the Waconia Citizen has shut down, adding to the growing demise of the newspaper. They couldn't continue because of financial issues, and they couldn't find a new buyer. Physical print papers may be on the decline, even though the majority of adults still read them, but that accounts for the older generation, not the younger generation that is more inclined to use technology. While online newspapers are on an increase, they are incorporating things from traditional newspapers, such as crossword apps and comics. We will likely see more and more technology and other forms of media becoming the more common way to get news as the years go on. Now, back to Allison to talk on hybrid newspapers and multimedia platforms.
Thank you, Evelyn. In order to keep their businesses going, newspapers have significantly changed their business models. Traditionally, newspapers make a profit through a combination of subscriptions and advertising revenue. Since 1995, subscriptions have catapulted from a slow to rapid decline. Although subscriptions were modestly declining, advertising revenue was up by 67%, causing newspapers to feel secure. Within the last 10 years, both advertising revenue and newspaper subscriptions have hit an all-time low. In result of this, 22,100 workers have been laid off in print newsrooms since 1995. Printed publications have added online platforms as well as social media accounts in order to keep themselves afloat and appeal to subscribers. For example, the New Hampshire Union Leader went from a strictly print organization to having a Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and YouTube to appeal to a larger demographic. Now to Macon and Shannon, who are discussing the role of social media in modern news.
In modern news, it is necessary to use social media to be successful. They have allowed news companies to get their news out there as quickly as possible, and with this brings a new level of competitiveness between reporters.
Platforms like Twitter are being used by daily reporters in order to get their information out fast. However, now it is becoming more popular for politicians to disclose information pertaining to the country or the state that they represent through similar sites.
A current example of this is President Trump's use of Twitter to release official government business. This ability has both advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are that these government officials can control what's being said because they're the ones saying it themselves. There is no worry of having to go through the process of an interview or a reporter misinterpreting what is said.
However, it also has its disadvantages because it is taking away business from news companies. Although there is an increased spread of fake news in online media due to people reading headlines meant to draw attention and sharing the article without seeing if the information is actually true.
Another reason why social media has taken over the current news media is because this is how the younger generation accesses all of their information. Social media plays a large influence on national conversations because more and more people are using social media as their main source of communication, and they're on these sites the majority of their day.
This causes them to see both major headlines and information they might not have been exposed to in a traditional news environment. On the positive side, this could lead to the dissemination of important information, but also fake or poorly sourced news.
As we can see, the media landscape is ever-changing. Evelyn?
To get another perspective on this, we interviewed a student at Franklin Pierce who had this to say about the news and media.
Hello, I'm Evelyn Cutting, and I'm here for the Presidency and the Press. We are interviewing subjects for a little video clip, and it is all on journalism. So, first question is, how old are you?
28. Oh. Do you want me to hold it? 28.
And do you or your family buy or read newspapers, like physical newspapers?
Yes, they do.
How often?
Well, they come out every Tuesdays and Thursdays. We get the Monadnock Ledger, which is the local newspaper, and we get it through a subscription.
Okay. And where do you get your news from?
Well, I get some from there. I mean, I do go to online sites sometimes, a variety of different kinds to get different perspectives. But
What kinds, for example?
like liberal ones like CNN or something like that, or
Do you use social media for news at all, or?
not really, no, because I wouldn't trust what
Okay.
they would say, I guess.
And do you have any commentary on journalism today in modern times?
I'm not sure. I would say that
Okay, we'll continue.
I would say that there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of attacking against journalism, and there's a lot of journalism that are like trying so hard to get after politicians and things like that. As far as local, I mean, I don't know if it's really that big of a thing, but so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you very much, and that will be it.
Although there is hope for the newspaper industry, could it be that the future of news is entirely online? For Evelyn Cutting, Shannon McKeever, and Megan Twitchell, this has been Allison Kaiser with the Presidency and the Press. Now, back to you.
Contacts are key in this industry. Luckily, we got to meet some big major companies like WMUR, NHPR, the Boston Herald, and the Union Leader, but also people like we talked about earlier. Now let's take a look at Bruce Zonka. Today we're here at the Franklin Pierce University to talk to a former White House official by the name of Bruce Zonka. He's going to talk to aspiring journalists about his life experiences and what it takes to be in the White House. Let's check it out.
Many students and teachers flooded a studio room at the Marlin Fitzwater Center to listen to a presentation from Mr. Zonka.
Now at college I had been a communications and journalism student, and so I had also had experience as a radio reporter. I worked as a reporter at an NPR station in central Illinois, and so they naturally assigned me to work with the press, and I became a press advance person, an advance man. And what that meant is that I went all over the world. Sometimes my first trip was to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and would make the arrangements for when Vice President Bush would travel someplace. So I worked with the Secret Service, and I worked with the White House Communications Agency staff, and then the local committee to make the plan for all of that.
Can you just give us a general overview of your career?
I was in charge of the care and feeding of the press corps. It mostly involved the logistics of getting the press where they needed to be and what they needed to cover the president.
Mr. Zanka was a press aide in the Reagan and Bush administrations, and also a spokesman and deputy to Marlin Fitzwater in the first Bush administration. His talk aids many students by providing insight on his experiences and on his advice.
I think the greatest thing that you can do is to get really good communication skills. You know, I started as a journalism student and as a reporter, and you know, so the thing that I would encourage you to do is to write. You know, learn how to write, learn how to edit audio, be a multimedia communicator.
It's important for young journalists to know how to use multimedia platforms because newspaper sales have been in a steady decline. News companies are transitioning into radio, TV, and online news. The Boston Herald has already begun this transition by introducing radio to their news outlet.
So a little bit earlier you had mentioned that you had met with a pope.
President Bush had a private audience with the Pope, and I was blessed to be a member of the staff and was allowed to be inside the inside the private audience with the Pope as part of the President's entourage.
What do you think is the most important characteristic for a White House correspondent?
Patience and maybe a sense of humor. You know, not take yourself too seriously. I think you need to be deliberate and thoughtful and careful in what you say, and I think it's also good to be kind.
For over 35 years, I've been a keen observer of the relationship between the President and the White House staff and the Washington press corps. I was a political advisor and a member of the White House staff, and have worked as part of the news media as a senior executive in a publishing organization. I've been a television producer, and it's very clear to me that we've reached a new height, or perhaps I should better say a new low, with the rancor and distrust between the President, his staff, and the press corps.
Here, Mr. Zanka is referring to conflict between President Trump and the media, who he continues to bash through his online Twitter account. What is the best piece of advice that you can give aspiring journalists and people who want to work in the White House?
I think what you should do is do the work. You know, try to find a job doing those kind of activities. If you want to be a press secretary, volunteer on a campaign. If you want to be a journalist, you know, find a newspaper, or radio station, or television station to work at. If they don't have a job for you, volunteer to work for it. Work towards an internship and doing all that. I think developing your skills is really important.
As long as you take Mr. Zanka's advice and do the work, you can have an extremely successful career just like him. This has been Taylor Yilley for the Presidency and the Press. For our next segment, we'll be focusing on our trip to the New Hampshire State House. Here we got a tour, and we got to meet many influential figures who are involved in our New Hampshire politics. Now I will send you over to our correspondent, Becca Dow.
Thank you, Taylor. I'm Becca, and I'm here with just a few people that were able to go to the New Hampshire State House. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Peter Schmidt.
I'm Kaylee Plunkett. And I'm Ashlyn Hatch.
So a lot of us haven't been to the State House since we were in 4th grade, so it's nice to re-see the flags and review the history of the building and the people that use it. And Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about the State House?
So some of the interesting things about the New Hampshire State House are that it is the oldest state house that has been in continuous use by the legislature. Also, another interesting fact about our legislators is that they are only paid $200 a term, the lowest in the country. One other interesting fact is that we have the 3rd largest House of Representatives in the English-speaking world.
Thank you. One very interesting and powerful person that we were able to interview was Chuck Morse, and he was able to give us a hint on what's coming up next. Isn't that right, Kaylee?
Mm-hmm. So there is some speculation that Chuck Morse may be running for Congress. It could be as soon as 2018 or later on. He has not confirmed this, but when asked if he would run for a higher position, he sounded as though he was considering it as an option.
Thank you. And another thing, he was able to share his views with the opioid epidemic. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. So when Chuck Morse was asked about the opioid problem, he said, and I quote, "The door is shut. You are not bringing drugs into New Hampshire." He said that New Hampshire is spending a lot of time and money to address the opioid problem, and in hopes of lowering the number of deaths in New Hampshire. There's been no foot off the gas, he said, so I suppose that there's no stopping the work on the drug crisis.
Thank you. And what about his Northern Pass?
Chuck Morse believes that the Northern Pass is a clean and renewable source of energy as long as it's as a certain amount of it is buried. He personally is fine with it, and he promotes it.
Thank you. Another interview that we were able to do was with Jane Millerick, and she's the governor's chief of staff, and she was also kind of hinting at something that was going to be happening today. Isn't that right?
Yes, Ms. Millerick indicated that Governor Sununu will announce major reforms to New Hampshire's regulations at an event today.
And other than that, what are the daily duties of chief of staff?
The job of a chief of staff is to report to the governor information about certain issues. According to Jane Millerick, a chief of staff could be rummaging through boxes one day, and the next day she could be meeting with commissioners at a meeting that the governor could not attend.
Thank you. And when we were touring around, we were able to stop by with Andrew Valinsky, and we interviewed him. And Peter, can you tell us a little about who he is and what about him?
Yeah, so Andrew Valinsky is one of 5 executive counselors, and he used to be a lawyer, and this is his first elected office. He looked at the different possibilities he could run for and decided that executive counselor was the way he could affect the most political decisions. And he ran with a small, well-thought-out campaign and managed to win. And the executive council, for those who don't know, has to approve department heads, judicial appointees, and contracts over $25,000.
So we definitely outnumber the reporters there, since there are only 2 full-time reporters. And we had a chance to talk to them and ask them questions, and Peter can also tell you a little bit about them.
Yeah, so there was an AP reporter, Holly Raymer, and a reporter from the union leader, Dave Solomon. And so these are the only 2 full-time reporters at the State House left. Just 10 years ago, there might be 5 to 10 there on a daily basis, but now it has shrunk to just 2, showing how the media has changed and how there is no longer the ability to permanently post a large number of people to the State House.
So in the State House, there's only one door that is open when the rest of the government branches are not in session, and that is the office of David Scanley, who is the Deputy Secretary of State. And Ashley, can you tell us a little bit about him?
Yes, we learned about how every presidential candidate has to go through the State House in order to sign up to be on the New Hampshire primary ballot, and they have to pay $1,000 to be on it. Mr. Scanlon also said that he encourages unknown people to register to become president. He even said that it is unheard of for an unknown to win a New Hampshire primary, such as Jimmy Carter.
Thank you all for the experience that we have let you have, and back over to Brandon and Taylor.
Over this past week, 4 students, myself included, Taylor Yealy, Allison Kaiser, and Emily Dunnigan, were fortunate enough to interview the host of Boston Herald Radio's The Rundown, that's Zuri Berry. Here's a short segment from that interview.
So that way we can sort of get their sense of how the media has been doing coverage of the Trump presidency and whether or not that they are addressing the issues that are most important to them.
The media, I think, spends too much time focusing on his tweets, and maybe there's more important things that they should be focusing on rather than his random remarks.
Taylor, thank you for your comments. You know, if he's not talking to the press, how else are we supposed to get his unvarnished thoughts?
Yeah, I do totally get that, but I think that they're sort of a distraction. I don't think that they deserve time in the media as much as they're getting. You know, for example, his most recent tweet, he talked about how the Republicans are good sticking together and he's upset with the Democrats, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And I don't think that statement is really important to the news. I think that they should be trying to get in on what he's actually doing and not just what he's saying.
Okay. I will accept that. We just talked about that on air, so maybe we spent too much time for your liking. You hear this news. What do you think? What do you think is the fallout? Who is to blame there?
There's many different contingents which this could hinge on. First off, the media. One thing they must continue to do is rely on fact-based reporting in order to get their message across. Due to recent things that have happened in the media, we also need to start shifting away from scorekeeping within the Senate to who can and will make the next move. This will give time for regrouping and the inspiration of new ideas.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Really interesting, actually. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate your comment there. So the last hour, we've been talking about healthcare, and thankfully the president tweeted at least 4 or 5 times about healthcare to make it relevant. So yes, I appreciate those comments.
My name is Allison Kaiser from Pinkerton Academy in Derry, New Hampshire.
Hey,
so
welcome.
Topics that pertain directly to the well-being of the American people require a large amount of constant coverage. Leading news sources are setting a precedent for coverage on the healthcare debate by telling us what decisions are being made on the national scale and by who. And I think that's very important for us to stay informed.
View that, as long as we're staying on top of major important topics like healthcare, then that's the way to go, right?
Well, there isn't a lot to know right now because there is a lot of confusion in the hands of people who are making the decisions. So as long as we can keep on top of the news as it comes, I think that is the most important job for the people to be doing right now.
I think there's a superficiality to the news today that's not good. And what's happening is
that was very blunt there, Brendan. Thank you.
I mean, I think the truth hurts sometimes, but this clearly is the truth. I think we're focusing a lot on the tweets, and we're looking at numbers and we're looking at statistics. But what's behind all those? That could just be a facade for a random poll group. Or a very particular poll group where those numbers and those statistics and those graphs are rigged in a particular way to get the media consumers to buy into it.
Yeah, being discriminatory about polling, I totally hear you on that one, and that's something that not a lot of outlets have gotten into. I think some polling outfits have been completely shunned and ignored, but others you continue to see still pop up. Thank you so much. I thank all of you for joining me today and having this conversation, and it's incredibly helpful and I think illuminating for our listeners to get your perspective.
I gotta wait till this kind of block goes away in my head because it's just I can't even believe that just happened.
It is very satisfying to know that I've done this and completed it. I think it feels pretty good.
I think it went very well, and I think that I was born to tell the news.
Hello everyone, I'm Emily Dunnigan from Pittsfield Middle High School located in Pittsfield, New Hampshire, and we are here at Franklin Pierce University reporting from the Fitzwater Center at the Presidency in the Press program. And I'm here with
Stephanie Ricky, I'm also from Pittsfield.
Nicholas Cantori, once again from Pittsfield. Bobby Graves from Nashville.
And we're here today to just discuss what we've done over this past week, as well as what our feelings were coming into this program. And I know that I, for one, was very nervous coming into this program and had no clue what I was good at, and I definitely wasn't confident in my writing or presenting abilities. And I definitely think that's changed.
I was also very nervous. I didn't know much about the program, and also didn't know much about journalism in general, so I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but it's actually turned out pretty great.
Continuing the trend, I, too, was also nervous. I thought I'd just be sitting in the corner reading my Ayn Rand all day, not really socializing much, but that's not the case. Well, kind of is, but I've definitely grown more confident in my abilities.
And for me, I know I was very scared about being on camera, but I feel more comfortable with that now.
And there were also 2 people in particular who actually helped us overcome these issues. And number 1 was Peter Mayer, who was a former CBS radio correspondent in the White House for 6 presidents. And another one was Bruce Zanka, who was a former White House spokesman for 3 presidents. And I feel that they kind of came alongside us and kind of helped us out and taught us how to act as journalists and how to act as interviewers and interviewees. And here to talk one particular subject which they talked a lot about was the trust factor. Stephanie?
Yes, they talked a lot about trust between the media and the government and between the people and the media. One thing they talked a lot about was this healthy tension between the media and the government. The government and specifically the administration and the media tend to have 2 different goals. The administration's goal is to follow whatever the president says,
and the media's goal is to find the entire story. And sometimes those can be conflicting, but whether they get into conflict or not, there was always a respect. But now we're seeing that change with the government, well, specifically the administration, coming out with accusations against popular media sources, which is making the media trust the government less. And it's also clear that the government trusts the media less. And also, this is making the people trust the media less.
And another important discussion which we had, and another factor which contributed to most of our activities which we completed this week, was the rules of engagement. Nick?
So essentially the rules of engagement address the civilities between the press and the White House. Particularly Bruce talked a lot about this, Peter also did as well. When Bruce was working in the White House, he had to deal with this a lot. So when the two people were talking, the press and the White House, they agreed to be on the same page when it came to being on the record or off the record, which is something that both Peter and Bruce said the Trump administration could use a lot of work doing, citing the Sarah Huckabee Sanders incident on the plane with the press. And Bruce had also stated, he said a really interesting story regarding the state of the media today. He worked under the Reagan administration for then Vice President George H.W. Bush as a motorcade driver. And during that time, a magazine, Newsweek, published a title page saying that George H.W. Bush was weak. Of course, the White House didn't like this at all, but they didn't go attacking the media, they just let it slide. But Bruce did not. When he was on the side of the road picking up all the reporters, he let most of them in, except for one that was still on the side of the road, which was the female reporter from Newsweek. He could have gone over and picked her up, but instead he just drove right on past her. And of course, George H.W. Bush was not very happy about this. Bruce got quite a scolding from the vice president.
And another factor which I know you also mentioned was also kind of like the exercises which we did. And one of those exercises, Ravi?
So I think one of the most beneficial exercises was learning how to properly interview someone, and having a very organized method of doing that. Start with a very brief but intriguing hook, then following that up with more details, and then end it with something really interesting, something different, some interesting facts. And I feel that was very beneficial.
And one exercise which was definitely beneficial for me was being in front of the camera. As a theater student, I had been on stage, but never really in front of the camera, so that was very terrifying. But ultimately, I came to terms with the fact that, hey, this is part of being a journalist, and I think that I've become quite comfortable on the camera. Stephanie?
Something that really helped me was the mock interviews. I knew absolutely nothing about interviewing or being interviewed, so having mock interviews with our peers really helped me understand what it's like to be in an interview.
And for me, I have to agree with both Emily and Stephanie. A big portion of this that really helped me was doing the interviews and on the camera itself. What we did a field report, meaning we brought the camera outside, set it up, and we were given a prompt, in this case being Trump tweets, which I'm sure you know how controversial that can be. So we wrote down our opinion on Trump tweets, and then Brendan Sika, our host, he interviewed me, and I gave my opinion, he asked the questions, and it was done. However, after that, we decided to mix things up a bit. I acted as a CNN anchor, leaning more toward the left, asking some hard questions, whereas Brendan acted as a White House staff member, where he had to defend the president 100%.
And that, too, we learned was a very important part of being a journalist, was being able to report without bias and kind of take sides on both issues and be able to have the information and the facts to support both sides as well. And overall, I think we can all agree that this was a very beneficial week, and we all learned so much about interviewing, being interviewed, and also about writing. I feel that we definitely grew as writers as well. And now we're going to be going back to Taylor and Brendan.
Well, Taylor, clearly it's been a week filled with interest and innovation and inspiration.
Yes, to wrap up this show, since this is our last day, I'd like to know, Brendan, what will you miss the most?
I think I'll miss the wonderful field trips we took, whether it was on campus to the wonderful cafe or off campus to WMUR. It was a great time. The staff here were wonderful, and the friendships which we built. I want to give a special thanks to all our producers and crew, our cameraman here today, Isaiah Dokas, and all of you who are viewing. Thank you.
Well, for Franklin Pierce University and the Presidency and the Press, I'm Taylor Yealy.
And I'm Brendan Sicca. Thanks for viewing. Good night.